Something I've seen a lot of Minecraft players struggle with is building boats. And in fact, I've been struggling with building boats and ships for the longest time myself. But by now, I've gotten some experience and will teach you how to build awesome ships yourself, while awkwardly fluttering about in the water. This video, however, is not supposed to be a block-by-block tutorial. I will rather teach you the general techniques I use. And to make it easier to comprehend, we will build together a small ship, like that. But the building techniques are really exactly the same. For the first step, all you need are full blocks, stairs and slabs of one material. You could of course also replace the full blocks with a differently textured material of the same overall color, as there are no stairs or slabs of this lovely bark texture, but for this we just stay with the basics. And the very first thing you should figure out is how wide you want your ship to be. Length and height are not that important right now. The real important thing is just width, as that will determine the scale of the whole ship. As I've already shown you, with this tutorial ship we will go with just 5 blocks wide. We need to keep that in mind when we decide how deep we want the ship to be in the water. And for this fairly small size, we really just want to have it 2 blocks deep. You know, 1 block deep, 2 blocks deep. Well, that will be the middle line of the ship's bottom. Well, the first stage of building will just be a 2D silhouette of the ship itself. And the most difficult part is the front. We have now the bottom, so you might think, you just go up with some stairs, right? Like that, but you definitely shouldn't do that. The important thing for a ship's bow is to have it very smooth, transitioning from the straight to the curvy part, so you always want to go with a slab first. Now with a small ship, 1 slab is I think more than enough, and we can then transition into full stairs. But depending on the size of your ship, you might also want to go with 2 slabs first. You know, maybe even another stage before we get to the stairs. You see how that really creates a very smooth curvature? So always go with slabs first. And experiment a little bit with how many you need, as that's really dependent on the ship, on the size of the ship, and also on the style. And then we're already at the mid part, because what you have to keep in mind, that stairs are already 45 degrees of angle, so they are really your midpoint in the bow. As for most ships, you don't want to get any steeper than that. There are exceptions of course, but for most ships you want to stay with that and then transition it back to the horizontal. And really it's the exact same thing, just the other way around. You want to go back to slabs and still keep up going up. And you know, with the nose there isn't that one recipe of how to do it, but it really depends on the shape. I tend to raise also the nose a little bit more up, and keep in mind that the tippity top of the front will be significantly higher than the side walls. So make it a little bit dramatic. You might also want... Okay, now the nose really gets long, but you can also do that you go a little bit down at the tippity top. But that really is mostly work with slabs and nothing else but slabs. And here you notice we have kind of actually a very rough edge. But that is something you can see or often see on ships in real life, as this part is not supposed to go in the water. It is totally fine here, but we can of course smooth it out, if that's bothering you. You know, like that. Then it's already a lot smoother. And now comes the part where we have to think about the length. It is maybe useful at that stage to just mark in the width, so you just have a visual reference of how big the overall ship will be. And I will certainly not give you a guide of how long to make your ship, because that's really up to you. Yeah, fine. And now with the back, it will start very similar. However, the difference to the back opposed to the front is that you go into a complete vertical. I will still start with a slab and a stair. But then maybe just one more stair and we are already kind of at that point. At the very top you can smooth it out a little bit, but that once again is artistic freedom. And my general advice with this first stage would be to take your time, because now you can adjust everything in terms of proportions very easily. Later on it will be difficult. So take your time and make sure that you actually like what you're seeing, because now we are turning this 3D. I like to use a different material for that, just to have a little bit of color contrast, but you don't have to, that really is up to you. And the overall shape, maybe just remove some blocks here, though it's clearer to see. Also on the sides you want to go first with a half slab, and only then with a stair. And following that stair we will just go straight up. This is of course a very simple shape, as it's a fairly small ship, but it doesn't have to be depending on the size of your ship. With this one, I've just used 2 slabs and 2 stairs instead, so we have overall a width of 9 blocks. Just to give you an example of how this scales up. Once again for this first round, you really just want to take your time that you're really happy with that curve. Then I think I don't need to tell you how to do the middle part, because that's just repeating it over and over again. But where it gets interesting is the front and the back, and that is probably, well, not just probably, well, that is the hardest part of building the ship, especially the front. So, listen carefully. You notice that I pulled forward the slabs all the way to the end of my row of full blocks, because here we want to start going up, and I'm just gonna use wool for a helper block. And you notice that we have quite a bit of a problem here. We could of course use another slab, but that will be a bit awkward, because then this lines up. So really what we want to have is a slab here rather, not a slab, a stair. That of course creates a gap, but you know, that can be filled. That ultimately means we also need an upside down stair here. And while that makes the bottom line jut out a little bit more, that actually works in our favor here. But you notice that on the top we can easily transition into a half slab and maybe even another one. And for this final row we of course need to extend the upside down stairs. And then it gets a little bit awkward. Because of this situation we could place a corner stair in here, but that doesn't look good, because that's not just an upside down pyramid. But we rather want to angle in this one. Then we of course have a gap again we need to fill in. You see how this gives quite a nice smooth shape here. And then we are back to just putting in stairs, because that already is a straight fill line. And even though we started with 2 stairs, actually here we only need 1, because then we get back to half slabs. And then we can see how far we have to extend that. Maybe that looks good. Yep, sure. But then of course this line still looks very awkward. We need to change that. And that is easily done with just putting more slabs and stairs down really. You just need to figure out what works best to have it curved down in a smooth way. And seeing that we might want to raise the front bit a little bit. Now I removed just some slabs here, so we have this transition. Yeah, something like that. And it's always a case of just placing blocks and removing them until you're happy. And at that stage I would recommend, before we get to the back, that you would copy over one side to the other. Does that make sense to you? Hopefully. But don't worry if it doesn't work out the first time round. It is a matter of trial and error. However, the good news is that you technically already did the hardest part, because the back in comparison is easy. However, the difference you want to make at the back opposed to the front is that you don't want to have the middle part protruding all the way, but rather flatten out the backside a little bit. The most outer layer, which comes now, of course starts very easy with just pulling the sidewall through. And once again I will turn the last stair into a corner and of course fill the gap behind it. And we need to place more stairs. But once again we will flatten it out towards the top a little bit. So we have another 3 stairs, but this way leading all the way to the top. Nope, not like this. Come on, Tony, don't break things and don't repair them. And even though this is a little bit flat, for a ship that size it's okay. We could maybe round it out a little bit more if we add a second slab down here, rather than having it immediately transition into full blocks, and remove a slab here accordingly. I think we will want to leave that one. But we could maybe exchange this then. You see what I did there? But that really is just fiddling about with blocks. We could even have the stair, not a corner stair here, and that would also work. But I guess a half slab works here best. Or maybe here we could use a stair. Oh yes, I like that one. Maybe even at the front. Let's try that out. Yep. We could remove... Yes, why not? Let's remove those. I guess that looks good. Alright, then repeat it to the other side. Now we also need to smoothen out the upper side. That depends a little bit of what you want to have on your ship. If you want to have a captain's quarters here, you know how far we want to drag that forward. I'm just gonna pick a random spot now. Yeah, and put some stairs there. And then it's just a matter of filling that in. But that certainly doesn't need to be that plain. You can smooth it out if you want. Maybe just try that for now. Here, just even a single slab can go miles. And then the hole generally is done. Of course, at that point it looks very plain, but that can be easily remedied. But first of all, let's take care of that. And something you might want to take notice. You see that on some of those spots there is air, which looks very ugly from underneath. And the reason that happens is because all of the blocks around there are air. So you need to fill them in, which looks very blocky, but then the issue is resolved. Now for texturing, what I'd like to use is just use also some stripped wood in here, which looks a lot sturdier and just gives it another texture. And then for another layer, you might want to add some signs on top of it. You could also use a different material, but it just gives it a bit more three-dimensionality, as they ever so slightly stick out. On a larger ship you of course want to have portholes. Oak trapdoors work wonderfully. And then for the deck, trapdoors are usually your best friend. I know they are very expensive, but they just work fine for something like that. But you can of course also use half slabs. And especially when you work at a bigger scale, you can use a combination of half slabs and trapdoors to create a wonderful curvature, like you would find it on real ships. And yes, you notice that actually on my proud clipper in my survival world I have exactly that problem. But I can't really do too much about it because of the interior. I will just ignore it for now. And you will notice of course that the shapeage of the hull is a lot more complex, but generally it's the same gist. You know, if we look at it closely, you notice that we also start by going up slabs, but only one half slab every couple of blocks, then one half slab per block, and then we transition into stairs. Before then, turning around. What I found works with larger ships is sometimes to use stairs sideways, but you could also have that stair from the front. It wouldn't make too much of a difference. And really it's just one layer after the other, and if you look at it, one layer at a time, then it's really not that complicated. And then for the captain's quarters you want to put in a wall, then maybe also a door. Ladders are of course very important at a ship, and that will be enough for a survival person to climb up. One of the most difficult things is to do a ship's wheel. Because it doesn't matter what you do, it just will always be awkward. I guess that kind of works, especially if you have half slabs. Let's exchange those. I guess that will make for a decent ship's wheel. Or maybe use oak here. Maybe better because of the cutouts, or maybe even copper. I'm not sure, but that actually looks pretty decent. But what I'm usually doing is just to put a lectern down. It doesn't look anything like a ship's wheel. But the beautiful thing about a lectern is that it has a lot of detail to it, and it draws your attention to it. It kinda seems important, like the captain was standing behind it. And considering that a lectern can output redstone signals, in the world of Minecraft that actually makes more sense than you would think. I don't know, it's just what I'm usually doing. Feel free to absolutely disagree with me on that and use something completely different. That is fine, I'll understand. However, with a ship's wheel, we of course also need a rudder. But that is fairly easy, just search for a convenient spot and add it in. Just like that. One nice thing is when you have a little bit of a visual gap here, so that you see the rudder is actually a separate thing. And what you also can do is just to give it a bit more shape. And that works alright. Now with the captain's quarters you might want to add some windows. It is of course, depending on the shape, more or less tricky. But at that stage you just might want to make adjustments here and there. We could even use a full block here. Yeah, you also see the flooring from the inside, which is not good. But maybe just use full blocks here and just get rid a little bit of the shape. Or use stairs. Sideways stairs. Oh, that doesn't work here. But it works down there. But the main thing that is missing is a mast. So let's add one in. What you can add in on the tippity top, even though that is really what I only usually do on bigger ships, is a crow's nest, which is really just a big jumble of trapdoors. I mean, you could use half slabs for the bottom, of course, for the floor. Then just remove one of them and have ladders here. No, the height is okay. But you see that the crow's nest is a bit large for a ship this size, so you might want to be careful with that. You could of course cheat a little bit and have it off center. Let's try that out. I have never done that. But why not? Why not test things during the tutorial? Sounds like a great idea, Tony. Yeah, I mean, from afar, it looks better than the other version. Even though it's a bit lumpy, of course. And I like to top it off with a wood block and then some fences, but dark oak would probably fit better here. And for the horizontal beams, I also usually use fences, but you could also use full blocks. And for the sail, it is of course crucial that you give it a bit of shape, a bit of body. So I've gone now with a very simple shape of just having the middle part, the middle 3 blocks jut out a little bit. Not just to the front, also to the sides. I think that gives it a little bit of extra interest. And we might also want to put down a few fence posts down here to actually attach it. But for the upper sail, we will do something different. Of course, if you have a ship on the ocean, you want to have it in with full sails, but maybe in the port, you don't want to have that, but rather a rolled up sail, which is super easy to do. It's not just something like a T-shape, works perfectly fine. But then there is still one important thing left. And that is also ropes that actually hold that mast in place. Because that's a pretty beefy thing that would just topple over if you don't secure it. And for that, just fences. And you will run into a problem if you just go step by step like I've done here, that doesn't quite match up. What you can do, of course, is just shorten down your mast, maybe elongate the nose. And you can also alternate. We have 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, which gives it a bit of a more natural shape. It still looks a little bit awkward here, but that you just have to live with unless you really just shorten it down. Of course, the more math you do beforehand, the easier it will be, but I don't like to do math for a Minecraft build. You know, and with some small modifications, it works out. And then we have to do the same thing towards the back, where you already can see that the back is quite a bit shorter. So we have to do that differently. Yeah, I guess overall that works. Then let's also add a flag. Bit on a diagonal to give it more life. How about do it like this? Yeah, and with that, the base of the ship really is done. Now it's all a question of just detailing. I've now added some more details. Also exchanged those signs down here with spruce, as that I think looks a lot better. And that just should give you a general idea of what you can do. But of course, depending on the style or what you're going for, especially the detailing might look very, very different. Of course, also in this world it's always just raining. Where was I? Ah, right. And now that you build an awesome ship in Minecraft, pat yourself on the shoulder because you deserve it. Ships are difficult. And maybe even make a screenshot of it and tag me on Blue Sky or Instagram. Or just let me down in the comments below if that tutorial was useful, or if you have your own ideas how to add to what I've said. Or just simply leave a like to let me know that it was useful. Any kind of feedback is very valuable for these kinds of videos. And if you want to see ships like that in action, or rather just in a survival world, that is the video for you. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and have a great day. Bye!